Your Creative Push, episode 258.
Climb into that moment and just have as much fun as you can and just try and stay out of your own way.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Bill Logan. What I love about Bill is not only his attitude about art, not only his kind-hearted nature, but just the fact that he is a guy that is not afraid to do everything that he wants to do when it comes to his creative passions. He does drawing, woodworking, bronze casting. He's a sculptor, he's a fly fisherman, and he makes super real flies, just to name a few of his creative passions. But he comes on the show to talk about switching back and forth between multiple creative disciplines and how he has enough ideas and things that he wants to create to last him for 500 years, something that I think a lot of us can definitely relate to. And along those lines, he talks about trying to go in one major creative direction, but also trying to take all of those interesting side trips that come up along the way. He talks about looking back on work that isn't even that old and having the feeling that it really is, in fact, old. It feels like it was from somebody else. And speaking of something that comes from somebody else, one of my favorite topics is those moments of creative genius when something comes from somewhere else that you don't really understand where it came from, and shifting your goal to get back to those moments over and over again. Then Bill dives deep into trying to figure out how to not judge what you're doing, but at the same time still make decisions when it comes to your art. Bill talks about the beauty of stop days and some of his experimentation with drawing blind and drawing with his left hand. And finally, the importance of realizing that your art is at your mercy and you are not at your art's mercy. Just a fun episode with a guy who thinks deeply about all of this stuff. And as such, we got right into the conversation. So not the typical intro that you're used to. We just hit the ground running. So please enjoy my conversation with Bill Logan.
There was and of course I can't even remember, her first name is Annie. I can't remember her last name. I'll think of it at some point when it doesn't matter. She wrote a book on writing called Bird by Bird.
Okay.
And actually one of the best pieces of advice I ever had about creativity came from that book. And what she was saying, she was talking about writer's block, and she mentioned that she has this little 1 by 1 inch square empty blank picture frame sitting on her desk. And it reminds her that to write a book, all she has to do to get there eventually is to fill the equivalent of that space with good words. That's all that anything beyond that is gravy, because it all builds up, and you have days when you just skate along, and you have days when you just got to stay in your chair, and that actually, I wrote that, I stuck it on my studio wall because, there are more days than not when I think, wow, I'd really like to be anywhere but here torturing myself. And sometimes the best work happens when you've just been so damn stubborn that you haven't walked away.
Love it. Stubbornness.
Well, I think that's a big tool, I think it sits right there with your paintbrush. It really does, and I spent a lot of time writing too. I grew up in a family of writers. Everyone in my family was literary, and I was the guy that drew pictures. My sister is utterly brilliant. She's like an Emily Dickinson for this century, and if she hears this, she's going to be pissed. Because she never shows her work to anybody, but she's got stacks and stacks of stuff. So, I was always the guy that did the opposite thing, and now, you fast forward, and I'm the guy that spends a reasonable amount of time writing, and she's the one that spends all of her spare moments painting. So we've kind of done this weird little switch.
Flip-flop, yeah.
Or maybe we're just kind of cruising along on two channels, and we're both on the same channels. I don't know. But the weird thing is, it all feels the same. All creativity, I think, feels the same. I mean, it really doesn't matter how you're applying it. Writing for me feels just like when I was a sculptor punching clay, and it feels exactly like when I've got a brush in my hand, and it will either do what I want it to do, or most of the time it doesn't. You're thinking, okay, well, how would I do that again? How would I do it better? And it's like forming a sentence and making the words and the cadence and the poetry come out. So
that's one of the things that like I try to encourage in the podcast is that you should feel free to move on to like something different, something that piques your interest that you might have no knowledge in. But like, it's like you said, it's still kind of that same creativity. It's still, you're able to do what creativity is meant for. It's like for getting something inside of you, out of you, and being able to express yourself and be able to like spend your time kind of wisely in that way. So when you switch to like these different like disciplines, was there like any kind of hesitancy, or was there like this thought like why is it that you switched to that thing?
Well,
or not switch, but spent more time doing that, I guess.
There are two things I need to say in this answer, and I think the first part of we have to step back before I answer the last part of the question. That's the fact that I think a lot of people, I think most people confuse what creativity really means. I mean, you think, okay, well, an artist or a writer or a musician or an actor, or, someone that is doing something that is demonstratively, creative, that's what creativity means. This guy's written a great sonnet, that guy's written a symphony, this woman has painted something I can't even believe, it's so beautiful. But, you can be a creative plumber, you can be a creative street sweeper, you can be a creative anything. I think creativity just has to do with being engaged and aware within your life. And looking at whatever you're doing. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter what your profession or your passion is. You just look at it and say, how can I do that better? What would it be like if I did it this way instead of that way? I'm a fly fisherman. One of my runaway things is to go sneak off and beat up trout on a little creek. And one of the cool things about it is that it is the most awkward pastime imaginable. It's someone along the way has designed every single thing they can do to handicap themselves catching fish, and then you turn around and you try and solve all the handicaps. It's kind of ludicrous.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
It really is. But there are a lot of better ways to do it. If you were, if I were out there starving in the woods, I wouldn't have, or on a trout stream, I wouldn't have a fly rod. But the parallel, the takeaway on something like that is that, when you live a life, you have a lifetime to live, and every tiny thing that you do just a tiny little bit better, balancing the washing machine so it doesn't kick out and spin, being in your studio in my old dilapidated house and remembering, I have to turn off the air conditioner before I can turn on my hairdryer or else I'm going to blow the fuse. Little tiny adjustments all the time. That's also being creative and aware, right? The other thing is, and that was the end of your question, was switching. How do you switch from one to the other? And I think I have a very hard time answering that question. In some ways, I'm my own, best friend and worst enemy, because I tend to get so very, very focused that I will sacrifice almost anything to keep doing it. I'll give you a great example. I was going to listen to a couple of podcasts this morning. I was going to write a whole bunch of notes on this outline that you gave me. And instead I snuck into my studio and painted for 2.5 hours. And it's like, finally someone called and says, isn't this the day you're going to do this? And it's like, oh shit. Yeah, I better. Oh, shouldn't say shit. Sorry.
No, you're good. No, you're allowed to.
Okay. I better get serious about this. And it's not that I wasn't, but for me to switch gears and juggle in a day is maybe the toughest thing. So usually when I switch over, if it's a creative thing, I have a train wreck of a day. I can't write in the morning and paint in the afternoon. It just doesn't work that way. I need a little kind of a quiet little concentrated block of time. And, it used to frustrate the hell out of me, but I've kind of reached a point. I'm 58 years old, and I'm finally reaching the point where I've done this long enough that, I recognize those frustrations for what they are. That's just my brain, rerouting its circuits. And sooner or later the process works, and sooner or later the words flow, or, this brush that I'm holding in my hand that starts out feeling like a stick suddenly becomes the thing that makes the mark that I either want or am so surprised by that I'm pleased. So I think, I think the only answer is that you just have to engage in the moment. And it's like that little 1-inch picture frame, empty picture frame. It's all cumulative. It's time on the boards, and you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And I'm speaking as a full-time artist. If creativity of some sort is your pastime rather than your profession, doesn't mean that you can't be specific and carve out some time and say, I'm going to allow myself to have this block of time, and I'm going to allow myself to be a little bit selfish about it. Creativity is selfish because it's all self-focused. You may be trying to communicate, and you may be trying to reach out and show someone something that you admire, or some thought that you've had, or, lead someone in another direction, or, point in the direction and say, what about trying this? But the real truth of the matter is you're the one on the journey. And when you take off into, in chase of creativity, you've got to be able to say, okay, this is my time. I'm hanging on to it. And I hope everyone else understands. And, sooner or later, people that learn to know you and love you usually do. I'm kind of a running joke in some ways among a lot of my friends, because, it's like, okay, someone will call and say, my wife is named Raiden, my sweetie. And she'll say, someone will call and say, don't forget, tell Raiden that, we're going to meet for drinks or whatever. And then I will immediately forget because I'm painting. Right. And then, or, a week later, it's like, uh-oh. And then I will turn to the love of my life and I say, so-and-so called a week ago,
Yes.
And, it's one of those things have to work on, it's just being able to step out of that moment is much, much harder than being able to crawl into it.
Hmm. I've found a very similar experience too, but I think it's like, I don't know if I'm just absent-minded or I just always have something on my mind. I always have either a list of things to do or like ideas to write about. So like when I'm emptying the dishwasher, I will put everything away and I'll leave all the cabinets open.
Yeah.
Like I won't finish the task. Like I'll do all these things that just infuriate my wife. Like I'm just so absent-minded.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a result of just being a creative person that's always has like these thought processes on their minds, or is just like something else?
I think it's just a busy brain.
Yeah.
I think it's just nothing more than a busy brain, and I can't understand, or no, that's going to sound too judgmental. Let me rephrase that before I even go any further. I know people that just punch a clock. I know people that live within very carefully measured lives, and some of them are happy and some of them aren't. But for me, and this is just me, and boy, this is going to sound like I'm preaching or something, and I don't really mean to, but most of what I do has an enormous amount of fascination attached to it. And probably a little bit of panic too. I don't know how old I was, but gosh, I don't know how old you are, but I was probably in my 20s or 30s when I realized we'll just say one day because it's good for the story. One day I realized that I had enough, in my sketchbooks and in my notes and projects and ideas, I had enough to keep me going for the next 100 years. And I was only 25. I'm 58 now, and I realize, the way time is spinning now, which everyone says it happens, and it really does. The older you get, the faster time goes. But I think what happens is the older you get, the more engaged you become in living, and the less time there is for just one or two things because you want to do 6 or 8 things, and it's kind of strange that, when I think if I did this for the next 500 years, I would still not get to the end of the list I have today. And I'm just adding to the list every single day. So, and that sounds morbid. It's not meant to be. The other side of that coin is that I am so excited that I have so much that I could do that I'll never stop. And I'll always be engaged and I'll always be fascinated. And there's always going to be something that is just frustrating the hell out of me because I can't quite get there, but I really, really want to. It makes me go, I alternately run away. I'm really good at being a procrastinator and lazy. For me, it's just that sometimes I just have such a difficult time finding the groove that I'll almost do anything not to, it's almost like pressure builds up until I can't stand it anymore. And then I get on the boards and then I start, I start making train wrecks and, and I'm reminded every single time. It's like one of those lessons you learn over and over. You just have to do it. You just have to sit down and do it. And you think of it as a profession, even if even sometimes if it's a pastime, it's all cumulative.
Yeah. No, it's just getting to that box, like you were saying, getting to that one little piece of the grid every single day, and trying to, because I think a lot of people that are listening can agree with you that if they had 500 years, they would still have even more ideas that they would want to get to. So it's just this, like, that whole thing is like this thing that you're going to be stuck with, and it's just trying to find the satisfaction in, each and every day or each and every block of time, just spending that time doing something, getting to something, and not worrying about the big project that, like, it is a part of, or these other big projects that you have in your mind, like not letting them build up and just like take over your enjoyment of getting to that one piece of the grid during that day.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. And I also, it's like following a compass, and then, you're on a road trip, you want to go straight north, and you keep getting these interesting little side trips. It's like, oh, what's over there? And you swerve to the left, or, oh, what's over there? You swerve to the right. And somewhere in there, you have decisions to make. It's like, well, do I really want to turn back and go north, or do I really like this little side trip? And my whole life has been kind of a combination of trying to, stay in one direction and find a way to take those little side trips too. I mean, I can remember I was a little kid when I asked my dad, and I mentioned it in the bio on my website, you probably read it, I asked my dad how comic strips are drawn, and he came home that night with, a dip pen and a bottle of ink. I don't know how long, I was a little tiny guy. And, here I am more than half a century later, and I still use exactly the same kind of ink. I haven't used a pen in years. I use brushes and mark makers, even, up to and damn near including my nose, anything that'll make a mark, except a pen, which is very strange. But, so in one sense, it was almost predetermined that this one thing was going to carry me through. And I've swung left and swung right, but I keep finding my way back to black and white, and I keep finding my way back to ink. So in one sense, you could argue that I've taken this really, really straight course. But if you just, had a little webcam and watched the course of my workflow in a week or a month or a year, it's almost like I have a show up right now. Let's just do it this way. I have a show up right now. Nothing in the show was done in the last year. Most of it is about a year and a half, 2 years old. And I look at it, and I get to stand back from it. I get 60 feet of perspective when I have a studio where I can't get back more than about 14 feet from anything. And it's like, wow, okay, well, that really works. That really carries. That, which I thought would work, then, that's all cool. But the other thing that happens is I look at all this stuff that is, not 2 years old. And I look at it and I think, that looks old. I'm not even there anymore. And that's a kind of an interesting thing. I see the marks that I made there, and those marks live in the stuff that I do now. I see the fascination I have with whatever aspects of picture making I had then, I still have now, but I move fast and continuingly, increasingly with confusion, because I don't know, maybe this happens with your writing. I think this probably happens with anyone that is creative and is pushing really hard. Sometimes you overstep, you jump past your understanding of what you're doing, and you don't know how it happened. You do something that is so different, or this little passage in a painting, or a couple of paragraphs, or a musical phrase, or half of a lyric, and you go, how did I do that?
Mm-hmm.
What is that? And you don't know how to understand what you just did. You don't know how to catch up to what you just did. You don't know how to get there, but you were there for a moment, and it seems to be happening with increasing regularity in what I'm doing. I think part of it is just, the central core is that you just have to trust that you get there and quit worrying about it. Work your ass off, but don't necessarily, don't say, okay, this is my grand plan. I'm going to do this year, this next week, this tomorrow. I think it just is, boy, this is an old hackneyed, saying, but you just got to trust the process. And, sometimes sayings ring true because they're true to begin with. Yeah. You just got to keep going. And it is, with me as much as anything, it's just dedication. It's just stubborn determination. I have a pretty good amount of ability. I've tried, there was a period in my life when I tried very, very hard not to be an artist and, tried to give up creativity. And I tell you about that if you want, but, I couldn't do it, to feel right and whole and as much like me as I needed to be. I couldn't, walk away from art making, and the writing came in much, much later. I was probably in my mid 40s before I started taking writing a little bit more seriously. And the truth is, I still don't take it as seriously. It's more of a recreation for me. I run away to write an article for a fly fishing magazine or something, and that's my way of playing hooky. And then I go through that weird little readjustment, and pretty soon I'm slinging ink again.
Slinging ink.
Yeah. Making messes. My God, you should see my studio. It's frightening. It's stacks of paper everywhere. Wow. So I don't know. I don't know if what I'm telling you helps.
Well, it does. And I think that's why like this podcast can go on to probably 5,000 episodes, because it's like this creativity is this thing that you can't quite put your finger on. And
yeah,
what you mentioned with like where you create something and you're like, oh, where did that come from? And like it's almost this thing that you have to figure out. It's like this magical moment where it feels like it's coming from something else. It's like this different identity has overtaken you for like a minute, and you're able to create something great, or like you don't even realize like that it was like this wonderful thing that you were somehow able to create until maybe like a year or 2 years later when you go back and read it or go back and look at it or go back and listen to it. And it's those moments that you like try to chase as a creative person, and it's wonderful to hear that they're coming in more and more frequently for you. And I think that's the whole goal though of creativity, is to try to like have that identity become you or become that identity,
But I also think that it has to do with trying to get rid of judgment. I don't know how much you read on my website, but there's I have a little bit of writing in front of some of my sections of pictures, and one little thing that I wrote there was about the most fabulous art lesson, the most fabulous drawing lesson I ever received in my life. You want to hear it?
Yes.
Little girl, and I'm embarrassed. This is, you should remember the name of the person that taught you the most important thing, right? But
you were painting while she told you, so that's why you didn't remember.
No, I wasn't actually. I wasn't. I was. That's true. I could have been. I wished I would have had an excuse. No, I was in graduate school, and I was a sculptor for about 15 years. I put down ink for a while and said, I just don't want to do this. I'm going to do 3D work. And I got my master's in it, and, I was pretty good at it. Here I am slinging ink again. But while I was in graduate school, I had to do a research paper, and I had become very interested in art from non-literate cultures, verbal tradition, Aboriginal art, Australian Aboriginal art was just, God, I just ate it up, right? And I got to wondering, is there any such thing in our culture? And it occurred to me that, in fact, there is, little kids, little pre-K kindergartners, maybe even edging into first grade, before they read, before they've kind of started to step into kind of the social system that we have, are completely their own. They're their own entities, and there's a point there, especially with the little ones, where everything they do is fun. Everything they do is good. There is no such thing as right or wrong. So it took me a while to set up. I had to get parental permissions and school system permissions and everything else. But I ended up spending a semester drawing there was one class each, one class pre-K, one class kindergarten, one class first grade. And I was also teaching a freshman level college course as part of my assistantship, and they were non-art majors. They had to take a visual arts elective, and those poor kids, they had to take this class Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights. Who wants to be in class on a Friday night from 7 to 9? Yeah, they were really happy. But I would have them, little kids would go to the zoo. And next time I saw them, I'd say, draw me a picture of your favorite animal. And then I would have the 18-year-olds draw their self-portrait as their favorite animal. And a couple of things. One was how it was really upsetting, actually, because I ended up with about 400 drawings, and you couldn't tell where the little kids and the 18-year-olds, you couldn't tell where the cutoff was, because when the 18-year-olds were still drawing the same way, they would put a line across the middle of their page. The top would be blue, the bottom would be green or brown. A whole lot of those pictures had a sun up in the upper left or the right hand corner, little yellow disc with yellow lines coming out of it. And they were 18-year-olds. And what I realized was that there was this terrible, terrible disconnect in terms of atrophy, maybe in terms of their visual literacy. So I started watching these little kids, and I realized that, somewhere around first grade, and you could even see it beginning to happen with the first graders, someone's saying to them, that's not how you draw a horse. You should draw it this way. Suddenly judgment enters the picture, and all of a sudden performance becomes an issue. And it's like, well, what if I do it wrong? And self-doubt. And that's kind of the beginning of the end. So there was this little girl, I think we'll say her name was Emily. She had one of the trendy names for the time. This was in the early 1990s. And she was this little tiny blonde elf of a girl. I mean, she was just this perfect little girl, right? And she had this box of crayons that was bigger than her head, and she was just a ferocious drawer. I'd go in, they'd all be sitting at their tables, and, these round tables, and she would have a table all to herself or maybe one other person there. And the first thing she would do, and the reason she had it was because she was just so ferocious, right? She would, the first thing she'd do, she'd upend that box of crayons. I mean, she would just dump them all out, 652 different colors, whatever they were. And then she would just go at it. I mean, she was just a crazy woman. She was so into it. So I got pretty impressed and pretty used to her, and, one day she's just scribbling along, and I walk over and I see, the sheet of paper in front of her. I see this big purple oval shape that's kind of scribbled in, and then shooting out of it in every direction are these lines with every color she could get her hand on. And I was like, wow, Emily, what is that? Mr. Literal Adult. Is it a pincushion? Is it a spider? She says, no, it's our dining room table. And she says, yeah, see, this, and she traced her finger around the edge of the old, she said, this is the top of the table. And then these blue lines sticking out here, here, and here, and here would be their legs. But if I'm under the table, then it would be the orange legs sticking down. And if it's the orange legs sticking down and I'm under the table, then these lines right here would be the legs for the chairs. And these lines would be my mom and dad's legs. And these belong to my dog. I was like, whoa. I mean, my brain, it just stopped, right? I couldn't keep up with her. And I was just blown away. But I also had kind of this funny little notion. So I said, can I have this drawing? She said, no. And I said, the bargaining thing with kids. I don't know if you've done it, but it always goes like this. Come on, please. Can I have it? No. Can I borrow it? No. Can I borrow it if I give it back next week? Okay. But you have to give it back. And it's like, cool. So I took it home. Next week I come back and there's Emily and she's ready to roll again. And I put this drawing down on the table in front of her. I said, remember this drawing? She said, yeah. So what is it? She said, it's our new car. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, if you follow this line, it kind of looks like the shape of the car, and that would be the windshield. And then these lines right here, and she just launched into this whole new story. And that's when I felt my brain explode. And it's never really gone back together. And I realized a couple of things. I realized that before someone tells you different, the symbols and the things that you create, in this case, draw, with crayons, can be anything you want them to be. It's a language all your own. No one says right or wrong. No one says up or down. No one says, red or purple. It is just what you want it to be, and doing and good and fun. And it's all one thing. And then someone comes along and says, you don't draw a tree that. No, Naomi, and you don't draw a tree that way. And all of a sudden the game changes. And, I hope wherever she is, and Emily's not her name, it's the one that we use, but I hope whoever that little girl is, she's ruling our world. I hope she is, because I've never been the same since that day. And what I try to do now, it's what I've been trying to do with marginal success, and suddenly it's starting to get better. Or I'm starting to get better at it, is how do I make pictures without a whole checklist of things that I'm judging them against. Is it well drawn? Is it well composed? Does it look like what it's supposed to be? Am I being a human camera? Does a mountain look like a mountain and a cat look like a cat? There are 100,000 different ways to make anything look the way it's going to look, and every single one of them is right. And what's finally happening, and one of the reasons that I am probably in my most confused and perplexed place, I've never been this and excited, is that I've kind of hit this spot where I am almost incapable of judging my own work. It just, the things that I'm doing, I wouldn't even considered doing 5 or 10 years ago, ripping into the page, letting the ink go muddy, scraping and sanding and poking and patching and I'm really glad I'm not coming back as one of my sheets of paper. I really am. And then I look at it, and at the end of the day, I was doing it this morning before I fled out the door to come and set up for this conversation. I'm like, what did I do? Mm-hmm. What do I do? What's next? And I think it's not like I have any of the answers, because I don't, but I think I'm a step closer to at least finding exactly the direction that is the right one.
Now, does that you said it's getting easier for you to do that, to rip stuff up, just go for it, and to take those questions out of your mind. Does that come from just doing it over and over and over again, or does it come from this kind of having to tell yourself as you're doing it, as those questions enter your mind, as those self-judgments and those judgments that other imaginary people might have of your work, telling yourself that those things don't matter? Do you have to shake those things off, or is it just from doing it over and over again?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's okay. How am I going to say this? All right. If I want to, I can paint a painting with every grain of sand in it. And that painting can be 10 inches on a side, and it can be a whole beach scene. I can do that. And there was a period when I thought that was the buy all and end all of picture making, right? And it was kind of like an exercise in precision, and at some point I realized, well, okay, this is really good, but I can go buy a cheap digital camera and take that picture. I'm not a human camera. The first thing you have to do is realize, and yet most art, and it's the sweetest compliment. Someone will look at something they do that's more realistic, and they say, well, God, that looks just like a photograph, and they really mean it, but they don't have the experience or the sensitivity or understanding visually that I do, mostly just because every day I'm in there doing it, right? So, the first thing you have to do, I think, is you have to say, well, I've got to start working it, not judging what I'm doing. And that's really hard. That's constant. It really is constant, because if you're not making judgments, if you're not making decisions, then what is directing you? How do you move? Right? There's a problem in that. It's a paradox, isn't it? It's right. I'm going to be free. I'm not going to make any judgments. I'm not going to say this is right or wrong or up or down or left or right. But if you don't make some kind of decision, you're just floating in nothingness. You're not moving in any direction at all.
Right.
So it's, how do you do that and still close your eyes and let go of the wheel? That's the first thing. And I think the other half of the answer then is that it is just time on the boards. You just, I say staying in my chair, but I actually stand when I work. And it is just a determination that says, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to do what I'm doing. I don't care if it's a good day or a bad day. I am just going to do it and do it and do it. And maybe ends up kind of feeling like a percentage game, and it's almost like playing a slot machine or something. But it gets better. And when I say that, what I mean is, and I'll give you an example, I always have a throwaway project. I usually have 2 or 3 things going, a series of pictures or something that claim an awful lot of my time and attention. But I also need to do something that I really don't care about. So I've drawn more than 500 cats. And for instance, which I guess you could argue is a pretty big series project of its own. But, the deal was I was drawing those cats with my eyes closed. I'm right-handed. I was drawing those cats left-handed. I was playing this game where if I wanted to start a drawing in the middle of a page, I would do exactly the opposite and start it in the corner. I mean, I was just playing all these games, and it didn't matter whether they worked or not, because in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, they would either succeed or fail. And I have a huge stack on one of the work tables, corner of one of my work tables. This stack is, I bet you it's pushing 2 feet high now. And it's a stack of dead drawings. And there's all kinds of stuff in there. And there, cats and flowers and all that kind of stuff. And the percentage, if I had an idea in my mind, and I'm drawing mostly from my head, it might take me 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 attempts. Maybe it's like being a dancer, to get the set of moves I needed to make the picture that I kind of wanted. So 6 or 8 of those, 10 of those would go into the loser pile. And then what happens is 6 months, 8 months later, I'm looking for scratch paper. I'm looking for a piece of paper to test my ink loads and a brush on, or whatever it happens to be. I collage a lot out of that pile because, it's interesting how a cat picture can all of a sudden become leaves on a tree if you cut and paste and glue. So it's just this great source. And I'll be plowing through this pile and I'll come across these drawings. And it's like, that's pretty good. And yet at some point, I made the decision in the middle of this freight. Well, it wasn't what I wanted. So sooner or later you hit the one you want, but it also goes back to the first thing we were talking about judgment, because obviously I was working with some kind of a notion within some kind of a paradigm. And the sad fact is, whatever you have in your head, whatever the inspiration or the notion is that makes you want to do something, make a picture, or write the perfect novel, whatever it happens to be, what you do will never be as good as the thing inside your head. I will never make a picture that's as good as my imagination. It's like dreams. Dreams always make sense when you're dreaming them, because it's not reality. It's in its own space. Everything there can be associated to anything else in any way that your brain puts it together. But when you put it down on the page, it's a whole different story, because that's reality, and you're limited by your moves, your ability, your mood, the time you have, whatever, there are all of these little side influences. And on top of it all, you're judging it by the thing in your head, which isn't fair. A long time ago, I learned that I was actually forced to, because I used to throw out drawing after drawing after drawing after drawing, and I had an acquaintance at the time that snuck into my studio one night and stripped it, every sheet of paper, sheets on the floor, everything else. And I thought it was almost like I'd been robbed or something. And it turned out, this was when I was in graduate school, it was a studio mate, and I found this pile of paper a couple of days later sitting in the corner of his studio. And I said, dude, what did you do here? And he said, you were just going to get rid of all this stuff anyway. And I said, yeah, but that's not the point. I mean, it's you stole it. It's my stuff. Mm-hmm. He says, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll give it back to you in 3 months. He said, but you're not going to touch this pile for 3 months, because there's good stuff in here and you don't even know it. Mm. And the lesson I learned, and it was a very good lesson, was that in the moment, with this thing in your head that you're judging everything else by, if you don't come as close as you can to that, you failed. And the truth is, you didn't fail at all. You just are looking at something with a very narrow vision, very, very cockeyed. Put it away, walk away, lean it against the wall, forget about it. They're in that big stack of stuff I told you, there are pictures there I forgot I even did. There are pieces of pictures I forgot I even did. I'll tear up a big sheet into 3 or 4 pieces, throw it in the stack as scrap paper, and later on when I look at a quarter of this drawing and I trim it up, it's like, whoa, that's kind of nice, just that piece of it. Well, I can make that decision because I've forgotten everything that bothered me about it. I've probably forgotten the impetus behind it to begin with. So my reaction would be very much like you walking in and seeing a picture of mine on the wall for the first time. You're not bringing anything with you. You were just confronted with the moment. And then you start to form your opinion. That's the beauty of being a viewer. You can like or hate something in an instant. You ask someone, what do you think about it? And they say, I don't like it. And I'll say, well, why? And they'll say, well, they start stuttering. They don't know. And then I used to do this with my students. I say, well, you obviously know why you don't like it or you do like it. So there's something that's engaged in there. Figure out what it is. And if you push, people can eventually, if you just really nudge them, they'll get there. But they get there feeling very, very insecure and very much put in the spotlight and very unsure of themselves because what if they're wrong?
Right.
You know, and the whole thing we're talking about here is if you have an opinion, if you want to be an art bigot, if you want to say, you know, this is Bill Logan saying, I think every piece of analytical cubism that's ever been done should be burned. You know, it's just horrible stuff.
Right.
I get to have that opinion.
Right.
And I can support why I feel that way, but you know, the thing is, I'm only right for me. You know, and we're all talking about the same thing. It's reaching the point where you allow yourself to do, boy, this is going to kind of sound spacey, do what feels right in the moment, and then allow yourself a whole lot of time after that moment before you decide whether what you did was right.
Right. No, I think we're touching on like some really great points about judgment, and judgment, I think, is like one of the biggest things that holds people back. And like exactly like you said, like people are gonna, if you post your work on Instagram or you're in a gallery, like people are gonna spend like 1 to 10 seconds with your piece. You know what I mean? They're gonna scroll on to the next thing. They might double tap it and like it. They might, you know, judge it for 1 second. But it's not like this thing where they're gonna analyze it the way that you have through your like many hours that you've spent on this piece, you know?
Right.
And I think that, so then you have to take away that judgment from others. And then it's just the self-judgment. And like you said, like looking back at your work that went into a trash pile might actually be a gem, and it might be a wonderful work. Or like you said before, like looking back at your work that you did like a year and a half or 2 years ago that's hanging in a gallery, and you're like, oh, I've changed a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's always the passage of time is always gonna change that. So like you said, in that moment, just do what feels right.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. And I think, you know, the other thing, and this is actually maybe my hardest lesson, and it's not a lesson. It's maybe one of the harder aspects of my existence is that I'm kind of reaching a point where a whole lot of what I do, people don't understand. And it's another one of those strange little paradoxes. If art is about communication and yet you are not communicating because people don't understand it, are you doing the right thing, or are you being incredibly self-centered and selfish just because you're chasing after your own creativity, your own muse? And you know, what does that mean? I mean, you know, galleries reject you and people don't like your work, and dear friends look at it and go, huh? There is a level of kind of constant frustration which actually grows. It's kind of weird because, you know, half of being creative is allowing yourself the freedom and trusting that sooner or later what you need to have happen will, or what you didn't expect to happen will, which is what you needed, right? But the other half of it is saying, I've got to get past the point where, you know, I even let other people be critical of me. Because, you know, really the truth is that, you know, there are creative people that, you know, the reason for using their creativity, you know, everyone varies a little bit. I mean, you know, when I was just out of graduate school, I went back to graduate school a little later than me, so I was in my mid-30s. And, you know, I was thinking, well, okay, I'm moving back to the East Coast. Big surprise. I wasn't expecting to, we were going to move west, but here we are in New Jersey. I've been here ever since. You know, I'm right next door to New York. I'm going to start trying to get in some galleries. I'm going to start trying to do this and that. So, you know, I started entering shows and talking to people, and somehow or other I got hooked up, and I'm not going to say his name, not hooked up, that's the wrong terminology, isn't it? But I had a conversation, met with an artist who was very, very powerful in the New York scene at the time. Not like a major league hitter. He wasn't on the varsity team, but he was definitely JV, and he had his moments when they'd call him up, right? Mm-hmm. And it was one of the most depressing conversations I ever had in my life, you know, because, you know, he was in many respects success. I mean, he was selling his work. He'd been on the art scene in New York for years and survived that, you know, I'm trying to think of a word for it. I mean, it's just a chaos of trend. He was looking at my work, and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, well, you're like this idiot savant. You're like this incredibly gifted high schooler that's been hiding in his basement drawing comics for years. And I said, what? He says, yeah. He says, what you're doing is wonderful and unique, but it ain't going to sell. No one's ever going to get it. No one's ever going to buy it. No one's ever going to like it. So what you need to do is you need to analyze, and this was his equation. You need to analyze the art scene, figure out what's hot, figure out how you can use it, and you'll succeed.
Fuck that guy.
But it's interesting. Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. But of course I was crushed too. It's like, what I'm doing doesn't matter. I just went through all those moments of self-doubt that you, by the way, never grow out of.
Mm-hmm.
But I also realized, they're great sections of my life. I've done almost everything you can think of in terms of creativity. I trained as a commercial illustrator. I moved to New York to finish school and become an illustrator in the days when magazines were magazines, and I did all right. I did great at it. But I was a lousy illustrator. And the reason I was lousy is that I didn't do or understand exactly what he said. I was doing my own thing. I was working in a business which by definition is a commercial team player deal. A magazine hires you, and New York Times says, we want something. Can you give it to it the next day? You know what the New York Times is. You know what their look is. You know what they expect, what they'll allow, what they don't want. And then if a financial magazine comes along, one of my greatest clients was Twilight Zone magazine.
Oh, cool.
How many other places do you have to draw a two-headed guy?
Mm-hmm.
But I would never have put the two-headed guy on the op-ed page of the New York Times. I would never have been allowed to. So you were, in a sense, doing exactly what this New York artist told me to do. You had to say, well, these are the parameters, and I must fit my work within that. And, I'm not, you said fuck him a minute ago. I'm not going to say that. I'm not, the fact of the matter is, within his equation, he was doing exactly what he wanted. That was his fit. It just wasn't mine. We can be really, really quick to judge people who aren't doing something the way we would, or who look at creativity differently than we would. But the real truth of the matter is that we don't have that right. All we can do is really, the bottom line is all we can do is say, I either like or don't like, I either understand or don't understand, I either choose to do this or don't choose to do this. You can be an art bigot and say, well, I just don't like this kind of art in general. You can be judgmental and say, well, and this is me probably being an art bigot again, so much art that I see in the galleries these days, there's no craftsmanship involved. It's not meant to last. It has somehow no staying power. It's probably not even going to exist in 50 years because the materials will fall apart. Well, personally, I don't respect that. I build something, I want it to be around. But see, that's just my gig. But by the same token, I can look at that and say, well, it's really cool that it's ephemeral. It's really cool that it's temporary. There's this whole thing about the fact that most of our life is ephemeral. What I just said a moment ago is already a memory that will never happen again. That moment is gone. Time is marching on, right? So you could play both sides of those same coins and convince yourself to believe almost anything. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I think all you can do when you hear someone say that, and boy, you're going to run into anyone that's creative runs into a bunch of people that says, no, no, we're not going to publish it. No, we're going to reject it. No, we don't want this in our gallery. No. It's going to happen a lot because not many people are going to be on your wavelength, so you got to get used to the fact that you get two choices. You can either say, okay, cool, I'm still doing what I'm doing, or you can get bitter or frustrated, which doesn't lead you anywhere. It'll lock you up eventually. When I say lock you up, I mean it will just stall you. You'll just become so confused because you're listening to everyone else's voices instead of your own.
Right. It's like kind of getting lost, like you were talking about before, getting lost in that dream. Like you have a dream and it's like that's your reality. So it's like kind of like trusting it. I had just a few hours ago, I had a dream that I was playing baseball and I not only hit in the park home run, but I woke up thinking I finally hit an in the park home run. You know what I mean? It's like you're like, yeah, you're just like, oh, like there's this whole like history,
yeah.
this whole like timeline, like as you're living
Sure.
this dream, it's like, oh, I've been a baseball player for 20 years and I finally hit it in the park. Or, you
Yeah,
know, like
yeah,
what?
yeah,
What is
yeah.
that?
Well,
But
when I dream, and maybe this is just the way my brain is wired. I don't know if other people must do this. I dream serially all the time. So, there's like 20 or 30 different stories, and these weird deja vu moments. It's like it'll be the same, the setting, the same, whatever it is from a previous dream, same people. But then the dream carries on and goes somewhere. I'm in a train station, and all of a sudden I'm riding a humpback whale. That weird little everything makes sense thing.
right.
But then the next time around, it's like, oh, there's the humpback whale again.
Mm-hmm.
Waiting
for you.
or what, and the dream, the ride goes on from there. It's just, it's very, very strange. But, there was reality in that too. And that, I don't know. I mean, the more you talk about this stuff, the more directions you have to go.
Right.
My sister, the brilliant one, is very, very good with analogies, and she's one of my great heroes and one of my fierce supporters. I guess partly because that's her job description. She's my little sister. But partly because she thinks about these things, and I'm smart, I think, but when I work, I'm much more intuitive than intellectual. So I was moaning and groaning at some point about how people don't get what I'm doing and da 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 da. And she said, "Well, you're like the guy that's found a rowboat." And I said, "Okay, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, okay, so big lake, cold water, you're in the rowboat, you've got oars, and you've paddled out about 100 feet further than anyone else has ever gone. You're in a boat, you're fine. Then you turn around and you're surprised because everyone else is still standing on shore and you're expecting them to swim after you." And she said, "Bill, the water is cold. Why in the hell would they swim after you? You're the guy in the boat." She said, "It's your job to decide either how to get them out there, how to convince them to come out there, or to go back to shore. Try something else." She said, if you're always going to be pushing yourself out on some limb and then complaining because no one else is coming out there with you, then, something in your thinking isn't quite meshing. You need to rethink this a little bit. And I think she was right, and I think that you just have to get used to, okay, we're talking about me. And maybe this is important. Maybe everything that we're talking about, whoever's listening should say, after I say something, or so he thought,
Yeah.
Cause it all changes all the time,
Right.
But, I'm really, really lucky that I get to sit in my rowboat. And that is partly, because I've worked hard enough and long enough that I've been able to build the rowboat. But more importantly, it's because every other aspect of my life has allowed me to do that. And really important. I mean, really, really important. You said before we began this conversation, is there anyone you wanted to mention, at the end of the show, anything else that I wanted to mention? And I'm just going to say it right now. I mean, if I hadn't found the only woman in the entire world who would get me and understand me and be at the same time amused and aggravated, and whatever it happens to be, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. My sweetie is in every aspect of what I do. I also live in a situation, a lot of people can't pursue creativity because they can't pay the rent. Can't pay a mortgage, got kids, got family, got bills and responsibilities. And, some of those things I don't have. We made a decision not to have children. I am very, very fortunate that my wife has a very stable job, and employers who probably feel about me kind of like she feels, alternately amused and perplexed and supportive. I've been very fortunate that I have this little tiny bubble, and, I supplement the income and good things happen. But I haven't had to listen to the wolf at the door in a long while. Now, who knows? This may shift. This whole chapter is going to be redefined. Eventually, everything is. But the one thing, and it's maybe one reason I work so feverishly, is because I know how good I have it, and I know what a precious gift it is, especially in this day and age when there is very little support for creativity and creative expression. I know how incredible it is to have that kind of support. So I am grateful. I am so grateful to my friends, to my wife, to everyone in hers in my life that allow me to do this. And I am really happy that I've reached the point in my own ability and perhaps my marginal understanding of myself where I can actually make sense of it and take advantage of it. Just crush it for all I'm worth. And, still at the same time say, well, okay, if you have a bad day today, it won't be a bad day tomorrow or next week. You just get up and you just keep going. One of the other questions you said you wanted to talk about is balancing time. And, how do you do that? How do you be what you want to be and also be what you have to be? And that's really hard. I mean, part of what we were talking about, I'm very bad at balancing time. But one of the things that you do have to do is have some ways to run away. And then you have to allow yourself to do it. I'm not very good at that either, but I'm trying to be better. A dear and favorite aunt of mine one time introduced me to the concept of the stop day. She said, this is how it works. They don't happen often. You don't make a habit of it. But every once in a while, even when you have too much to do, if you wake up and say, I just need a break, declare a stop day. Screw it. The problem will be there tomorrow. The thing you got to deal with will be there tomorrow. Stop day. And you do whatever the hell you want.
Personal days.
Personal days. And the more responsibilities you have, the more that you have on your plate, the less likely it is that you're going to take them. But I think it's really important. And I don't think of them as personal days. I think of them as playing hooky. Because that's a lot more fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I have, 17 pictures sitting on the boards and none of them are working and I've got chores around the house and I've got to go renew my fishing license or my driver's license and whatever. I'll grab a fishing rod and go run up a little creek here and fish for the day. Don't do it often, but once in a while I do. And man, those are the best days on the planet. And then the next day you're back to doing what you're doing and the things you need to do sort out and you may be exactly where you were with the same frustrations, but you're facing whatever it is that you have to face again. It's not like you're going to run away, but you've got to run away for a minute. So that's I think one way to balance things.
Yeah, and you can also then the next day approach it with a little bit of more of a fresh mind and like a little bit more energy, and like the problem doesn't seem as like unending because you had this little break. It's so important to take breaks.
It's perspective, isn't it? It's perspective. The sun rises, the sun sets, the little creek runs. Everything that you love, everything that you run away to is still where it was yesterday. It's still there, and you just happen to be here, and your little problem fits into that bigger picture.
Right. No, man. Well, I really do appreciate you, coming on and telling us your journey and, bringing us into your universe and kind of you're out there on the boat, but throwing us the life preserver or whatever to bring us into your world. Because I think that's what it's all about. I love that analogy of being out in the water and everybody else is kind of on the shore, not really wanting to get their feet wet or become cold. You know what I mean? And I think that's part of like what, writing about your art or talking about your art or just kind of communicating about art is all about. It's about bringing those people into your universe, into your boat, if that makes sense. And it's so important to do as well.
Or figuring out how to join them in theirs, because either way, there's a meeting in the middle, right?
Right.
And the whole, when I had my wasn't an opening, it was a reception because it was a week after the show opened, but I had the reception this past Saturday, and it was really, really funny. I had a camera in my pocket. I was going to hand it around to friends and say, you be my photographer, take some pictures of the opening. I got so excited talking to people that I forgot about that camera in my pocket for the entire 3 hours, right? So I don't have a single picture of my opening. I'm going to have to, hit up all my friends and see what I can do. But the thing that was so much fun, and I don't do it often, but every time I do, I realize I really enjoy this, is just talking to the people that come and look at the work. There was this one lady that was about 900 years old. And, she said, I used to paint, I used to do this and that, but, she said, my hand doesn't work as well as it used to. And, I just don't I just can't do what I did at one point. And God, I hope I didn't sound like a know-it-all or something, but we were looking at the cats. I have a big wall of cats. They're just kind of gridded. They're not even framed. They're just clipped up, 18 cats, 3 rows. And I said, well, see that one and that one and that one and that one. I drew that with my eyes closed. And she looked at me like I was a Martian. And I said, yeah, I drew with my eyes closed. And that one there, I drew left-handed. I said, I'm not lefty. And it was a really nice little drawing. And part of it, what I was trying to tell her is, the marks that you make, the moves that you make, the thing that you do, there's always a glass half full thing. I mean, Matisse was a great painter, but I think by far, and again, I get to have my own opinion, but the strongest work he ever made was the work he made when he was bedridden as an old man, couldn't paint, and picked up a pair of scissors, and started clipping up paper. He had, and what you don't know is in the background, he had all these assistants, coloring all these sheets of paper with gouache and preparing all this stuff. And, I have this vision in my mind of Matisse laying in bed with a giant pair of child safety scissors, clipping away. And he did murals this way. That incredibly famous book of his, Jazz, all the cut paper art, just Google Matisse paper, collage, whatever, and you will be hit with images that you probably don't realize you've seen your whole life. And he did it with a pair of scissors. No paint, no canvas, no studio. Just an old man, sick man, couldn't stand up, laying in bed with a pair of scissors. Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the lady I talk to will pick up a brush and try and do something left-handed, or maybe she won't. But we really had a fun, amusing moment. And after, she'd walked off, I stood looking at those cats of mine for a second, and I realized that there's another lesson that I have to relearn. When I paint, I stand, I look down at what I'm doing. Ink has to be on a flat surface, or, it'll run around too much, although sometimes I tilt it and let it run. I have a brush in my hand, I make my marks, and I react to my marks and try and make a picture. And, my brain is going, everything that we've talked about that it should happen and sometimes shouldn't happen is all happening. And, if I say, well, this isn't working, do my throwaway project, the cat project, the flowers that I draw now, whatever it is, that's that little runaway moment, pick the thing up left-handed, close my eyes. I literally, it is so silly. Sometimes I literally spin in place a time or two. So I have absolutely, with a loaded brush, first time I did, I didn't realize I was slinging ink all over the studio. It was just flinging. I was like, whoa, okay, maybe we need to modulate this somehow. But, I got that down. So I will literally turn around 2 or 3 times, and then I will just left-handed, eyes closed, slam that brush down onto a piece of paper and start, painting, drawing, whatever it is, picture making, right? And I'll do it for I've learned I can do this for about 2 or 3 or 4 seconds, and then I gotta reload the brush. So I'll kind of hide my eye, turn, see my ink pot, dip it in, turn back, slam the brush down, and I get some of the strangest, most disjointed pictures I've ever seen in my life. But man, they are just freaking magical, some of them. And the reason is that I am not paying attention, I can't remember the exact purport or the exact percentage, but I think I read somewhere 95% of what we know about the world is gathered in visually. I don't know if that's the right percentage, but it's a huge percentage. We know we're very visually oriented, right? You take that away and you've just got this tiny percentage of the rest of your senses trying to engage in the impossible act, and when you make a mark with your eyes closed, you feel your hand for the first time. You feel the brush scraping along a sheet of paper for the first time. You hear it pretty much for the first time. All these senses that are kicking and firing all the time and kind of being, overloaded or masked out by the fact that your eyes are guiding you suddenly are the whole game. And it has helped me realize that, some of the marks I make, some of the moves that I have, are much more experiential than they used to be, because I really do pay attention to, I use brushes so hard, I'm working in ink. I use black India ink, and I've got 2 or 3 different dilutions of it. But if you really think about it, I never have to clean my brush because I'm just using black. So I don't respect these brushes. I use cheap ones because I scrub them and beat them up to the point where the little metal, if you know what a brush is, there's a handle, there's a little metal collar at the front, and it pinches down and holds the bristles in one end and clamps onto the handle of the brush with the other, right? I grind these brushes down to the collet. I grind them so far that I split the collet open. I grind them so far that I end up making marks with just that metal part, and scraping and scratching, and oh my, the marks you can make. But part of that came from drawing with my eyes closed because it made me push until I could feel it. It made me push until I started ripping my paper. It made me do things that if I was watching myself, I would never have allowed myself to do. Now I have to figure out how to control them. This morning, I'm working on a picture I don't understand again. I've always got 30 or 40 pictures. There's stacks of them all over the place. I've always got at least that many going. And for some reason I got frustrated. I was trying to paint a waterline, indicate a waterline along a bluff of a cliff face, Norway painting, fjord painting. And I just totally messed it up. So I just took that piece of paper and I put a slash of white water or wet water, clean water horizontally across it. And then I just started messing with the sheet and wrinkling it and literally wringing it in the middle, just like you would a towel. And I just ripped in and wrinkled and crinkled that surface. I closed my eyes. I could feel myself doing it. I could feel when I started to rip the paper. And when I opened my eyes and looked at it again, I had this incredibly distorted sheet. Drag some ink across it, pull it back out. And what you have is a set of moves that were completely intentional. And yet, just by the way I did it and dragged the brush across this thing, I had no control how it was happening. It became an act of utter chance and happenstance. Now, I don't know if that thing's going to survive or not. I have absolutely no idea whether that picture will succeed. It's very, very close to tipping over the edge. But what's the takeaway from this day? Well, the takeaway is that I decided that, to even a more extreme extent, the sheet that I'm working on is not holy. Or maybe it is holy. I punched holes all over it. But, it's just another thing that is, if you really want to think of it kind of gruesomely, that thing is at my mercy, and I'm not at its. So, when we hang up, I'm going to go home and I'm going to pick up that paintbrush again, and I may murder a drawing tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Painting, I may, but it'll sit in that loser pile. And who knows, 6 months from now, maybe I'll come across it. And if nothing else, the textures are glorious. The marks and the moves are glorious. The picture itself may be an abysmal failure, but something in there will be something that when I see it next time will, it'll spark a memory. It'll spark an idea. I'll say, oh my gosh, I need this texture in this thing that I'm doing because I cheat and I build pictures. I collage. I cut. I paste. There is no such thing as being a purist in my book, and it may be that, I'm painting a pretty picture of an iris, and all of a sudden the Norwegian cliff face gives me the texture I need for an iris petal. You just never know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we like to end the show with the final push, and that's
Okay.
where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Well, that's easy. It goes back to something we talked about early on, and that is the fact that there is no such thing as good or bad. There is no such thing as an act of creativity that is less or more valuable. There's no such thing as a judgment you should listen to in the act of making something. Just be in that act. Do what you do. Enjoy that moment. Put on your best music. Make a cup of tea. Climb into the space that you've created. Within your head, on that page, punching clay, writing, making the perfect, writing the perfect piece of music, whatever it happens to be, whatever your creative act is, organizing your bookshelves, organizing your music, whatever. Climb into that moment and just have as much fun as you can, and just try and stay out of your own way. And trust that, in fact, that's exactly where you should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great advice, man. Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for telling us your story, for diving deep into all this kind of stuff. I love it. And if you want to find more about Bill, you can find him on his website, which is BillLoganArt.com. And we'll have everything else we talked about today linked up at the show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Bill Logan. Bill, thanks again.
Oh, this has been so much fun. I'm going to have to go drink a big mug of tea and water my vocal cords.
Yes.
I've been blabbing a lot. I've talked more in an hour than I probably will in the next 10 days. So thank you. I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed this very, very much.
Oh, man. My thanks once again to Bill for coming on the show. So much great stuff in this episode and so many things I can touch on here in the summary. But the one thing that I really wanted to make sure that you guys heard was Bill's explanation about how to ride that difficult balance of judging yourself, but also not judging yourself. And Bill said it so well that in the moment that you're creating something and you kind of have your judgment like right alongside of you, right in your head as your sort of co-pilot, and it's telling you how far off you are from being able to put out into the world, being able to create the thing that's in your head, how far off you are, that makes you feel like if you don't completely nail it or come extremely close, then you failed. And that's why it's so important to save that work and come back to it later. You have to look back at it when the judgment is gone, or at least when the judgment has this, amnesia, and you can look back at it with an untainted set of eyes to see the value in it. When you're still close to the creation process of that thing, that judgment is still circulating. And in fact, it's even stronger than ever. So you need to put that away. You need to save it for another time to see if there is value in it. And I guarantee you that more often than not, there will be something that you can gain from that thing. And I know we talk about the struggles sometimes of approaching the blank canvas and being willing to just go for it, to just attack your creative passion, being willing to create garbage, to be willing to throw things out. And you have to approach it with that mental fortitude. And it is so important to approach it in that manner. But you kind of have to pretend as if you're going to throw everything out, like Bill was saying, so that you're not too precious as you're creating, but don't actually throw it out. Save it so you can look back and find those gems, or at the very least, see how far you've come in that time period. It's so important, and one of the awesome messages that Bill was able to share in this episode. There's actually more. Bill and I talked for another 20 minutes, and that is available for my patrons on Patreon. And I want to thank Shawnee Sheldon, who was actually on the podcast before, Paolo Coagdan, and Amanda Reed for becoming patrons on Patreon. If you want to join them, you can head to yourcreativepush.com/Patreon or patreon.com/yourcreativepush. Either way will get you there. You can get the bonus content from today's episode as well as all the other bonus content and find out what you can gain if you become a patron on Patreon, least of which is the satisfaction that you are supporting the show that helps to support you and all of the other creative people that need this push. On our next episode, we have Evan Mel Amundsen. Evan is an illustrator and artist out of Copenhagen. He's already been around the world at a young age. He's worked for Blizzard, he creates for Magic the Gathering, and he creates some amazing freelance work. And he comes on the show and really dives deep into his own creative process, his own creative resistances, and some really fun stories. You can find him on ArtStation. He's there as Mischievous Little Elf, and we'll have that as well as everything we talked about today linked up at the show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Bill Logan. But that's all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we'll be here for you next time if you need the push again. I love you all so much. Go and get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.